90% of large projects are going to be off budget or off their schedule, right? So statistically, it's not going to work out if you do it as status quo. Like the numbers don't lie.
Produced by Podcast Architects.
Welcome back to The Path Forward. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Rick Fernandez. We're here at TASA Midwinter 2024. I have friend of the program, Superintendent Coldspring-Oakhurst
CISD.
You got it. Bryan Taulton with me, as always.
Back.
Thank
Sure.
you. And the man in the hot seat, Principal, Frontline Advisory, Craig Starcher. Craig, thank you for your bravery today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
So
sir.
we're evolved to solve. So the theme is my co-host and I are going to grill Craig a little bit and talk about construction. We're going to talk about projects, what goes right, what goes wrong, and let's come up with some solutions of how school districts can maybe do it a little bit better. So let's fire away. Tell us exactly what you do, Craig.
All right, so Frontline Advisory Group, we manage capital improvement programs, primarily for bonds. So say an ISD issues a bond, they've got 10 schools that they're trying to build or fix.
Sure.
And we would manage that entire program, acting as like an owner's rep for the school, working with the construction firms, the construction manager, but then also from looking out for your best interest as a school. Mm-hmm.
So why do we need an owner's rep? Because I know that conversation has come up in a lot of boardrooms. Why do we need that? Do we need that? Can the architects run the program? Is that something, can our own internal staff do it? What's the purpose?
Yeah, so think about like an engineer is really, really good at engineering.
Right.
They're really smart folks, but they don't have a background in budgets and schedules and things like that. Like when you start thinking about what it takes to run a large program like that, it's really outside the scope of their expertise.
Yeah.
So what we say is allow them to run the project and do the engineering side of it or the design side of it.
Sure.
And allow us, our entire firm, for the most part, has all come from military background, experience in finance and things like that. Like the military has paid millions of dollars to train us to be really organized and run stuff like this. And so we believe that taking that scope that we specialize in
Sure.
and separating that from the scope that they specialize in and have the best people doing the job that they're most qualified for.
So I guess I would say too on that note, just looking at something like that, especially with your hands-on involvement in that, what do you recommend? Do you recommend, because I know some school districts will have kind of their own project managers and things and people that are on staff that will run that project.
Yeah.
But from that side of it, do you think it's best practice though, from a superintendent standpoint, to have someone internally run that's in district, or work with someone like your organization, your company to take on that?
I've actually been really excited to see, because we have a local school district. I've seen a college that's doing a lot of work in Texas, and as they're building and growing, that they brought in-house a program manager, which I was like, all right, that's a step in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
Instead of having like the person that runs your maintenance or something try to then
Take
take
that
on that
on.
extra load, like that's just unreasonable to ask, right?
That's right.
The challenge is that you're still bringing in one person to do something that requires specialties and a wide variety of things. Like for me, I went and got my PMP when I was transitioning out of the military, the project management professional certification, right?
Okay.
And I thought, all right, I really know schedules. Like I'm pretty good at construction schedules, until I met our scheduler here at Frontline Advisory Group, and I was like, I'm barely scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Like, so. We think that it really takes a team to do this,
Gotcha.
and so but it's not reasonable for you to hire an entire team for a temporary
Gotcha.
program or project, right? So that's why we're providing our services, is that we bring in a team of someone that specializes in government finance, which is different from normal finance that you would go to school for.
Sure.
Someone that specializes in schedules, and then someone that can really bring it all together, a program manager. That can speak the same language as the school, speak the same language as the engineers, and kind of be that translator for everybody.
Yeah. And that was one thing, like I said, too, that we look at, obviously in my district it's a little bit small, we're 3A. And so in looking at a bond, obviously, depending on the size of the district, it's gonna vary. Obviously we only have, roughly 4 schools. But in the largest district, you may have 10, 20, 40, just really depends. And then also you have much bigger bond projects.
Exactly.
That be ongoing, as well. So that's always one thing that comes up, because from a superintendent side of it, we all know that bonds are very tough to pass, especially in small school districts. So then what happens is, from the board standpoint, superintendent seat as well, you want to make sure that, obviously we're good stewards of taxpayer dollars, but then the project is done with diligence as well. Because at the same time, that's how ultimately bonds fail in the future, right? If there's a bond that's needed, okay, well, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, and then the timeline was off. So a lot of it is the follow through and working with anyone that's actually going to be kind of heading that project up and making sure those things are being done in a timely manner. So those are some of the things, like I said, that do come up. Just making sure there's follow through and those things are done expeditiously.
Exactly. And so you brought up a couple things that we're seeing, especially in Central Texas, right? Everywhere in Central Texas has a decade of record-setting growth, right? Just explosive growth. And you're seeing all these small cities, like we're in Dripping Springs.
Okay.
I talk to folks at my church and things like that. They tell me stories about when they played football on US on 290, the major highway going through Dripping Springs, which is TxDOT's working on putting like a major like I-35 like highway down, not 20 years ago.
That's right.
And so you may be a small school, but in the past, your bonds may have been relatively small. And even if your bond's not $1 billion bond, like you're seeing some of these other schools come out of, a $400,000 bond, maybe 10 times more than you've ever managed in the past. And so you're going through this very new thing that you don't have experience to fall back on. And so we're seeing that not just with schools, but with cities as well, that they just have never done this before. And so we're helping them through that transition. And then when you talk about it, you're right. If you don't do well on this first one, it's going to be 10 times harder, because everyone's going to remember that.
100%. I mean, I don't want Bryan to have to say it, but I will. We're judged on, did you get a bond pass?
Exactly.
Right? As a superintendent, let me call it like it is, right? Why are the projects so always off on the timeline? It drives me nuts.
Exactly. And so the 90% of large projects are going to be off budget or off time, off their schedule, right? So statistically, it's not going to work out if you do it as status quo. Like the numbers don't lie. And it can be for a wide range of reasons, right? So it may be that you didn't budget enough, like you were trying to get the number low enough that the voters approved the bond, right? And then you just screwed yourself for for actually executing on the bond. That's going to take 5 years.
Right.
And prices are like the
vary,
past 5
they change
years,
them,
they're
right.
just skyrocketing, right?
That's right.
And so now you're having to go back, and the voters they're not going to understand that. A lot of them aren't going to understand that. They're just going to see that I'm now having to spend more money on something that you did before, and they're going to assume that it was because of the government, right? The government mismanaged this money. And in reality, y'all are doing the best that you can, right?
That's right.
And so that's why we think it's really important to have someone that specializes in that budget. Like they're looking at, are you going to have the cash when you need it to be able to execute? Because that's one of the biggest reasons why a project is off. Is these government projects take so long because the government, if they don't have the money lined up in ahead of time properly, the engineers are just sitting there, waiting for the next one so that they can start the next phase of the project. I've seen that with some smaller projects because they think they can use operating funds or something like that to pay for
And
it.
it comes pay, and you're like, all right, which credit card do I grab to pay the bills?
Or
maybe that's my personal situation.
Or I'm tied to tax dollars, right? And those tax dollars are coming in a year later than when they're actually accrued, and you're tied to this annual budget cycle.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. Or change orders, man, that'll get you. If you're you create a plan, like the construction company they're going to bid low, right?
Sure.
Knowing that you screwed up the plan, and they're going to be able to throw some change orders in there and make more money on you because of, you didn't have someone to explain that this is something that you should have added or looked at before, going to the market.
And one thing we talked about as well, my district is currently exploring the possibility of a bond within the next within the next year or so. But then also making sure that there is contingency it funds as well, just for those kind of change orders or things that come up,
exactly.
so on and so forth. So
Yeah,
that's
'cause
always
things are
very
gonna come
important.
up.
100%.
Like-
It's a certainty.
But give us, like, as a superintendent sitting in the seat, what are the valid reasons for change orders versus the ones that we should be skeptical of? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I've been working on this project, and I came in halfway through the design of this project, and I just got a change order for things that happened in the 30 and 60, 90% design, from a year ago.
Oh, wow.
They're all valid change orders because the government organization was asking the engineers, like, hey, what if we tried this? Like, go back to, and the engineers are like, yeah, sure, I'll redesign it for you. And knowing that, in a couple months, like, they have a valid change order to send back. So if you don't know exactly what you need and you're in there, like, testing it with them, like, they're providing you a service, a legitimate service. Yeah. And so you're going to have to pay for it.
And that adds to the whole purpose, kind of what we talked about, is having someone very, very hands-on, it's like an expert. In dealing and addressing some of those things.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
otherwise, if you have someone that doesn't know, then again, you're not being a good steward of taxpayer dollars at that point.
Yeah, and it comes down to planning, right? You talk about I'd spend 80% of my time planning for the execution of the project, right?
What questions should we ask someone like you, right? If we're evaluating, what do we need to ask to kind of get a sense of? Because it's a relationship. It's got to be a huge trust factor. How do we evaluate owner's representation?
Yeah, so I guess you're trying to see, like, how do you gauge whether someone is going to be a good owner's representative,
Yes.
right? So one is, do you have the experience? Like, for us, like, we've been very fortunate, and why our model is different than others is that we have scale of projects that we've managed, right?
Okay.
So normally you would see an owner's rep that's managing one school, and it's more like similar to like a construction manager, right? Like, they're coming in to build this one product, and it's one big product. For us, we're managing entire bond programs. So in the past 5 years, we've been able to manage or have under management over 100 projects.
Okay.
Right. So some of them are still in the works. But out of all of them that we've completed all of them on time and on budget. Like I said earlier, remember, 90% of projects aren't going to be completed on time or on budget, but we've been able to show that all of ours so far have been on time and on budget.
So it's a little bit of bandwidth and a little bit of what have you delivered as you said.
Deliverables.
Yeah. And so, do you have enough experience? And what's your team makeup look like?
Okay.
Are you going to bring in one owner's rep, which is what we're saying not to do, right?
Right.
Like, you could just hire a program manager
That's
for
right.
that. Or are you going to bring in an entire team?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it works at scale with a bond, right? Is that for one project, you don't need that, right? But for an entire bond program that has a bunch of different projects, and a lot of them have impact, they can impact each other, things like that. Like, it's important to have an entire team that specializes in these things, to be able to manage that.
Bryan, you got anything else?
I don't think so. I think, like I said, some of the things you touched on, like I said, a lot of these projects with bonds and things like that is, like some of the things you mentioned, is within budget and then being timely.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, like I said, when you start looking at, let's say, for example, a district is growing, obviously you want to stay ahead of the growth curve.
Exactly.
So a big part of that is going to be just to follow through and just making sure projects are done on time and projects are done in accordance kind of what was planned and what the community, because at the same time, from a district level standpoint, we engage the facilities assessment committee, right? So we've been meeting with them for, let's say, a year, talking and discussing projects. And so then at the same time, they're going to want to know, okay, well, hey, we're supporting this, but then on the deliverable side of it, okay, what's the timeline? Or do we stay within the timeline? Because then those are the voices in the community, right? So let's say in the future there's time for another bond. Then those people will say, hey, I served in this committee. This is what we did. We followed through. We worked with this, with the school district. We worked with the architects and so on and so forth. And we actually had this project done, and we saw it through from start to finish. And so those things like that are critical from a superintendent standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's transparency and just making sure you follow through on what the facilities assessment recommendation was to the board and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And I think that brings on, you hit a couple things about the importance of an owner's rep is about the transparency and the community aspect is, they're not just looking at the construction project.
Yep.
Like we're looking at what's happening in the community that you need to get ahead of, right?
Yep.
Because the stakeholder engagement with the
Yep.
community is extremely important on moving a project forward. Like I've seen projects get canned because they just didn't properly ahead of time work with the community, and the community just came out and with so much outrage that they're like, well, no, we can't move forward. And the other, I hit on planning, right? So
that's right. That's a big.
What we advise is that bring us in as early as possible, not when the bond is out up for vote, like for the election, but well before that for the planning. Like, do you have what you need in the bond? Do you have finance costs associated correctly? Are those costs associated to the schedules, things like that? Like having that already in mind, so like what's this project like? How is it going to be executed? How is it going to be phased out? And then how does this support the next bond? Because
that's correct.
There's going to be another one. If your community is growing like this, you can't do it all at one time. This is phase one, and you need to make sure that phase one is supporting phase two.
That's correct. And I agree, like I said, when you talk about phase one, because again, when you start looking at bond number two, the community is going to want to know, okay, where we are on bond number one, how did that whole process from start to finish go and work? Because again, if it goes and things are according to plan, it's within budget, they're more prone to say, hey, we know this is a need and our kids deserve it, and they'll jump on board with it. But a lot of it is really engaging the community, engaging those stakeholders to kind of get behind the bond project. As well. So
and that's what we talk to about marketing and things like that. Like for what we do, and it's one is about the service that we're providing is different than the rest of the industry, and so it's about educating elected officials and senior leaders in these organizations. But the other aspect is educating the community on why this is important. And so that's a big part of a bond or any other project that's using taxpayer money or that's impacting the taxpayers, like educating them on, we have one like a huge concert venue coming into a city. It's like everyone is against the concert venue because they don't know. There's so much unknown to the community that they're like, that's going to cause a ton of traffic, things like that. Like, well, maybe there's extra lanes being built to support this venue, and it will actually support the other businesses. But if you're not communicating that kind of stuff to the community, the unknown, like their mind's going to go wild, and then you're stuck having to be reactive.
When everybody's starting to just speculate, that's never a good process.
No.
So over the course of the last 3 weeks, we have been dealing with the craziest weather. We got back, we returned to school from the holiday break on January the 8th. So obviously we come back, and there's a professional development session going on at one of our Jones Education Complex. So I go over and visit, and all of a sudden I get notification on my phone. It was like a severe weather alert, right? So we got a tornado touchdown, and it shows Coldspring. I'm like, oh God. So got that. We navigated that. The next week, we dealt with an Arctic freeze, right? We all know it was cold. So last week, obviously we've been dealing with floodwaters, and we have Lake Livingston that backs up to the district, and so we've been dealing with some flood. And so I did a delayed start. Obviously, our buses normally go out in the morning when it's dark. Obviously in our community, we don't have, some of our roads are not as paved, and then we don't have a whole lot of lighting. So we started school. I'm always going to err on the side of caution. So we started school at 9:45. So the day is going. We're in school roughly an hour. So then I get a call from my police chief that we got to close school. We've only been in school for an hour, so the county judge enacted a closure due to floodwaters, and we've only been in school an hour. So now, first time ever since I've been a school administrator, we got a delayed start and a closure, an early dismissal in the same day. So we started at 9:45 and got out at 1 o'clock.
It sounds like you had the whole gamut within 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You need Noah needs to be around there building an ark for you, man.
So that was just like I said, a crazy story to share. I've never had a delayed start and an early dismissal, and then just a series of weather 3 consecutive weeks.
Oh, yeah.
And so I started sending my staff before I left because we had to close early on Wednesday of last week, and then they closed us down for Thursday as well. So I sent them all a little clips from the movie the day after tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? So in California they had the tornadoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then in New York, in that area, you had snow, right? And so then, but also in New York, you had the flood waters right there in New York as well before the freeze came. So yeah, I sent them a little meme. So yeah, we dealt with it. So, but no, that was just an interesting story, like back to back to back.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine
Yeah.
like the logistical challenge
Oh,
of trying
man. I
to
had to
get all the
get
bus
buses,
drivers and
yes.
everything
That's
like
a
back
that's a
in,
nightmare.
Oh man.
back out on the
So
roads. Like
Here I am. I'm over at the county judge's office. I'm working with the county judge and the Office of Emergency Management. Got the signed letter from the judge, and we needed at least an hour to notify. So I literally got the letter at 11:57, and we had to send information out to the school community. We're getting out at 1 o'clock.
oh yeah.
We can't top
wrong
that. Craig,
So,
Craig, before we go, any shout outs you want to mention, any socials? How do we get in contact with you?
Yeah, so frontlineadvisorygroup.com. We're posting articles, everything like that, about educating the community on what we're working on. And then LinkedIn, Facebook, X, we're on all of them.
Very nice. And I always appreciate you, Dr. Taulton, coming in and
Yes,
joining
sir.
this and sitting in and co-hosting. And if you like what you heard, if you like what you saw, please like, subscribe, share with your friends. We'll have many more guests on, and hopefully we can help some districts solve problems. Thank you for being here.
Produced by Podcast Architects.